October 14, 1944. Monte Cassino, Italy. Oberst Heinrich Vogel lowered his rangefinder and smiled with the confidence of a man who understood mathematics. Through the precision German optics, he'd been studying the American positions across the valley. 1,000 meters, maybe slightly more. His command bunker, reinforced concrete, elevated position. Perfectly safe. "They can't touch us here, mein Herr," his aide, Hauptmann Franz Richter, said with certainty. The maximum effective range of their M1 Garand is 500 meters. Even their best marksmen, perhaps 600, maybe 700 in perfect conditions. We are at 1,000 meters. We might as well be on the moon. Vogel nodded, lighting a cigarette without concern for the smoke visible in the morning light. He'd been a ballistics instructor before the war. Understood bullet trajectories, wind drift, the physics of long-range shooting better than most men understood their own names. At 800 meters, a bullet dropped 6 feet. At 1,000 meters, over 10 feet. The calculations weren't just difficult. They were impossible for human computation in battlefield conditions. The Americans are brave, Vogel admitted. But bravery doesn't defeat physics. At this distance, we can observe their movements, coordinate artillery, direct operations. They cannot threaten us here. What Oberst Heinrich Vogel didn't know, what his mathematical certainty couldn't account for, was that across the valley, lying in a rocky depression that made him nearly invisible, was Private First Class Charlie Chihuahua, White Mountain Apache, 24 years old. Born and raised on reservation land in Arizona where the nearest town was 40 miles away, and survival meant hunting mule deer across terrain so harsh that white settlers had declared it worthless. Charlie's rifle was a Springfield 1903, not the modern M1 Garand that most American soldiers carried. The Springfield was older, bolt action, based on a design from before the First World War. The Army had tried to replace it, but Charlie had requested it specifically. Had qualified with it at Camp Pendleton, shooting scores so perfect that his instructors thought the targets had been switched. The Springfield had belonged to his grandfather. Well, not this exact rifle, but the same model. His grandfather had owned one since 1920, had taught Charlie to shoot with it when Charlie was 7 years old. Taught him on land where ammunition cost money they didn't have, where missing meant the family went hungry, where a wasted bullet was a wasted week of food. "If you can see it, you can hit it," his grandfather had said in Apache, the old language that fewer people spoke each year. The bullet knows where to go. You just have to know how to ask. Charlie had killed his first deer at age 8, one shot at 400 yards. His grandfather had measured the distance afterward, walking it off, counting steps. 400 yards. The deer had been feeding in a draw, partially concealed. The wind had been gusting from the northwest at maybe 15 miles per hour. Charlie had aimed 3 feet high and 2 feet left. The bullet had struck perfectly behind the shoulder. Clean kill. Instant death. No suffering. His grandfather had skinned the deer in silence, but when they'd carried the meat home, he'd told Charlie's father, "The boy sees what the bullet sees. He doesn't shoot where the animal is. He shoots where it will be when the bullet arrives. This is rare. This is the gift." Charlie had been shooting at long range for 16 years before the Army had ever tried to teach him. By the time drill instructors at boot camp explained bullet drop and wind drift, Charlie had already compensated for those factors thousands of times. The math they taught in classes, the formulas and calculations, those were just ways of describing what Charlie felt in his bones. Through his scope, Charlie watched the German officers, counted them, 5 visible, noted their ranks by insignia, 1 Oberst, 2 Hauptmanns, 2 Leutnants, all standing casually, smoking, pointing, discussing, all assuming they were safe because distance meant safety. Charlie took out his notebook, a small, weathered book he'd carried since arriving in Italy 6 weeks ago. He recorded everything. Wind speed and direction measured by watching grass movement, feeling air on his skin. Temperature, approximately 52 degrees. Humidity, high from morning mist. Barometric pressure, estimated by cloud formations. Altitude, about 1,400 feet above sea level. Distance to target. He'd ranged it yesterday using a method his grandfather taught him. Find objects of known size. Measure angles with fingers at arm's length. Calculate distance using ratios. The German bunker was 1,087 yards away. 1,087 yards, just over half a mile. At that distance, a .30-06 bullet from his Springfield would drop approximately 17 feet. The wind, currently from the west at about 12 miles per hour, would push the bullet right by roughly 14 inches. The target, a human torso, was about 18 inches wide. His margin for error was measured in inches across a distance of over 3,000 feet. The German officers were still smoking, still laughing, still perfectly visible, still assuming the laws of physics protected them. Charlie calculated the shot in his head. Aim high by 17 feet. Aim left by 14 inches to compensate for wind, but also account for the Coriolis effect, the Earth's rotation, which at this distance and latitude would push the bullet slightly right. Account for altitude, thinner air meaning less resistance, and slightly flatter trajectory. Account for temperature, cold air being denser than the ballistics tables assumed. It took him about 10 seconds, the same amount of time it took most people to decide what to have for breakfast. But he didn't shoot. Not yet. Because the wind was gusting. 12 miles per hour average, but gusting to maybe 18. He needed consistency. Needed to time the shot for when wind speed matched his calculations perfectly. He waited. His grandfather had taught him that patience was more important than accuracy. A deer will always move eventually. A man will always show himself eventually. The hunter who waits will always defeat the hunter who rushes. 20 minutes later, the wind steadied. 12 miles per hour. Consistent. Perfect. Charlie's breathing slowed. 4 breaths per minute. Learned through years of hunting, refined through necessity. His heart rate dropped. 60 beats per minute at rest. Maybe 50 now. Each heartbeat moved the rifle slightly. He timed his shot for between heartbeats. His finger rested on the trigger. 3-pound pull, worked by an armorer who understood that Charlie wasn't a normal shooter, who'd seen his qualification scores and understood this rifle needed to be perfect. The crosshairs settled, high and left of Oberst Vogel's chest, 17 feet high, 14 inches left. Charlie's vision narrowed. The world became just the scope, just the target, just the mathematics of bullet flight translated into instinct honed over 16 years. He squeezed. The rifle cracked. Recoil pressed into his shoulder, familiar and comfortable. Through the scope, he watched. The bullet traveled at 2,800 feet per second. It took approximately 1.8 seconds to cover 1,087 yards. In that time, gravity pulled it down 17 feet. Wind pushed it right 14 inches. The Earth's rotation added another 3 inches of drift. Temperature and altitude affected trajectory by inches that most people would consider rounding errors, but that meant the difference between a hit and a miss at this distance. Charlie watched Oberst Heinrich Vogel's body jerk backward, watched the cigarette fall from his fingers, watched him collapse behind the sandbags, watched the other officers scatter, dropping, screaming into radios, pointing in every direction except the correct one, because they couldn't believe a shot had come from 1,087 yards away, because that was impossible. Everyone knew 800 meters was the maximum effective range. Everyone knew that beyond that distance, shooting was luck, not skill. Everyone knew the math didn't work, the calculations were too complex, the wind too variable, the target too small. Everyone was wrong. Charlie chambered another round. The bolt action was smooth, well-oiled. He could fire 10 rounds per minute if he rushed. But rushing was for people who hadn't learned patience. He scanned for another target. The German officers weren't showing themselves anymore. They'd learned. One shot, one lesson. Stay hidden or die. Charlie packed up his position methodically. Spent casing collected. Brass was valuable. Position camouflage restored. Within 5 minutes, he was moving. By the time German artillery started impacting his previous position, he was 300 yards away, already planning his next shot. That evening, he reported to his commanding officer, Captain William Davies. Davies looked up from paperwork as Charlie entered the command tent. "Chihuahua, heard you took a shot today." "Yes, sir." One German officer, approximately 1,100 yards. Davies paused, set down his pen, looked at Charlie with the expression of someone who'd heard something impossible and was trying to decide if he believed it. 100 yards. Charlie, that's beyond anything in the doctrine. That's twice the effective range we teach. Yes, sir. Are you certain of the distance? Ranged it twice, sir. 1,087 yards. Wind was 12 miles per hour from the west. I compensated 17 feet high. 14 inches left. Clean hit. Officer killed instantly. Davies studied him. Charlie was small, barely 5'6", thin, didn't look like a soldier who could do impossible things. But Davies had seen his qualification scores, had seen him shoot, had watched him kill German soldiers at ranges that other snipers said couldn't be done. The Germans are going to think it was artillery or lucky rifle fire. They won't believe it was a deliberate shot. Charlie shrugged slightly. Doesn't matter what they believe, sir. Officer is dead. Their command is disrupted. That's the mission. Davies nodded slowly. I'm writing you up for this. Division needs to know what you can do. We might need to adjust tactics if we have a marksman who can threaten targets at these distances. Sir, I can shoot farther if needed. My grandfather made shots at 1,200, 300 yards hunting elk in the mountains. I can do the same. Davies absorbed that. 300 yards. 3/4 of a mile, that's almost artillery range. Yes, sir, but I can hit specific targets. Artillery just hits areas. If you need specific officers eliminated, I can do that at ranges where they think they're safe. And that's how Private First Class Charlie Chihuahua became the most feared sniper in the Italian campaign. Not immediately. Not with recognition or medals or fame. Just quietly, methodically, eliminating targets at distances the Germans believed were impossible. In the German command structure, confusion was spreading. Vogel's death was attributed initially to artillery. Random chance. Bad luck. But when Hauptmann Johann Strauss was killed 2 days later at 1,120 yards, also by a single shot, also while standing in a safe position, questions began. Major Klaus Brenner, commanding the defensive sector, called a meeting of his remaining officers. 2 senior officers killed by single shots, both at ranges exceeding 1,000 meters, both in positions we considered secure. This is not random. This is targeted. This is a marksman. His intelligence officer, Oberleutnant Werner Meissner, had been researching. Herr Major, we've captured American training manuals. Their doctrine states maximum effective range for rifle fire is 500 meters. Even their designated marksmen rarely engage beyond 700 meters. What you're describing is impossible according to their own standards. Brenner shook his head. Doctrine doesn't matter if officers are dying. I need you to calculate the exact distances of both kills. I need to know if this is one shooter or multiple positions. I need to know how to defend against this. Meissner did the calculations, used German precision optics and trigonometry, measured from the bodies to likely shooting positions. His conclusions, delivered the next day, were disturbing. Both shots originated from American-held territory across the valley. Distance to Vogel's position, 1,087 meters. Distance to Strauss's position, 1,119 meters. If these are the same shooter, he's operating at ranges we considered tactically irrelevant. What's the maximum effective range of American rifles? The M1 Garand, their standard infantry rifle, approximately 500 meters against point targets. Their Springfield 1903, an older bolt-action rifle some units still use, possibly 800 meters in perfect conditions with expert marksmen. But Herr Major, 800 meters requires perfect wind conditions, perfect shooter, perfect ammunition. And even then, the shot is more prayer than science. Brenner looked at the map. At the distances marked. Over 100 meters. Get me Hauptmann Dietrich. If we have a shooter this skilled, we need our best counter-sniper. Hauptmann Rudolf Dietrich arrived the next day. He was a legend in the Wehrmacht. 83 confirmed kills on the Eastern Front. Survivor of Stalingrad, where he'd held positions against Soviet snipers who were themselves legendary. He'd trained at the German sniper school, understood ballistics like a physicist, could calculate wind drift and bullet drop in his head with mathematical precision. Dietrich studied the positions where Vogel and Strauss had died, measured distances himself, examined the angles. Then he delivered his assessment with the confidence of expertise. Herr Major, I don't believe these were deliberate shots. The mathematics don't support it. At 100 meters, bullet drop is 15 to 17 feet depending on ammunition and temperature. Wind drift at typical wind speeds, 10 to 20 inches. The target, a human torso, perhaps 18 inches wide. The margin for error is essentially zero. But 2 officers are dead at these distances. Yes, sir. I believe American rifles are firing at our positions regularly. Most shots miss, hit the ground, the sandbags, nothing important. But occasionally pure chance a bullet finds a target. This is probability, not skill. If they fire 1,000 rounds at 100 meters, perhaps 1 or 2 will strike a man. That's what we're seeing. Brenner wanted to believe this. Wanted to believe that luck, not skill, was killing his officers. Then we continue operations as normal. We don't adjust positions. Dietrich nodded firmly. Adjust for normal sniper operations, yes. Stay below 800 meters threat range when possible. But don't disrupt command because of random chance. That would be letting fear dictate tactics. They were wrong. And the cost of being wrong would be measured in German officers' lives. October 18th, 1944. Charlie was in a new position. He'd moved 4 times in as many days. Never stayed in one place. Never established patterns. His grandfather had taught him that a smart hunter never returns to the same kill site because the prey learns, adapts, remembers. Through his scope, he watched a German officer conducting an inspection of forward positions. The officer was careful, stayed low, but had to move, had to do his job. The distance was 1,210 yards. Charlie had ranged it 3 times to be certain. 1,210 yards, almost 7/10 of a mile. A distance where most people couldn't even see a human figure clearly without optics. The wind was tricky, 15 miles per hour with gusts to 20. That meant waiting, meant patience. His spotter, a young soldier named Jimmy Martinez from Texas, whispered beside him, "Charlie, that's gotta be over 1,200 yards. That's impossible." Charlie didn't answer, just watched, waited. The wind would steady eventually. Wind always did. And when it did, he'd have his shot. Martinez had been assigned to Charlie 3 days ago. Initially, Martinez had been confused. "I'm supposed to spot for you? I thought you were the one who needed spotting." But after watching Charlie work, Martinez understood. He wasn't there to help Charlie shoot. Charlie knew how to shoot. Martinez was there to learn, to watch, to understand how someone could do things that doctrine said were impossible. 20 minutes of waiting. Then the wind steadied. 15 miles per hour. Consistent. The German officer paused in an exposed position, looking through binoculars at American lines. Charlie calculated. At 1,210 yards, bullet drop would be approximately 19 feet. Wind drift, 18 inches. Coriolis effect at this latitude and distance, about 4 inches. Temperature was colder today, meaning denser air, slightly more bullet drop. Humidity was lower, meaning less air resistance. The angles were slightly uphill, meaning gravity would affect trajectory differently than flat shooting. The calculations took him maybe 15 seconds. Then he aimed. High and left. So high that he was aiming at empty sky 3 feet above the officer's head. So left that he was aiming 1.5 feet away from the target. But Charlie wasn't aiming at where the officer was. He was aiming at where the bullet would be after traveling 1,110 yards through wind and gravity, and the rotation of the earth itself. He was aiming at the intersection point of physics and precision. He fired. The bullet traveled for 2.1 seconds, long enough for the German officer to shift his weight, long enough for the wind to gust slightly, long enough for Charlie to wonder if he'd miscalculated. Then the officer collapsed. Clean hit, center mass, instant death at 1,210 yards. Martinez breathed a single word, Jesus. Charlie chambered another round, scanned for more targets. But the Germans had learned. Everyone was down. Everyone was hidden. One shot, and an entire company had disappeared behind cover. Martinez was still staring. Charlie, I saw you aim. You were aiming at nothing. You were aiming at sky. How the hell did you hit him? Charlie finally spoke, his voice quiet. The bullet drops 19 feet at this distance. I aimed 19 feet high. The wind pushes it 18 inches right. I aimed 18 inches left. The Earth's rotation pushes it another 4 inches right. I compensated. The officer was where the bullet was when the bullet arrived. That's all shooting is. Putting bullets where targets will be. But how do you calculate all that in your head? Charlie looked at him. I don't calculate, I see. My grandfather taught me to see where bullets go before they get there. It's not math, it's knowing. Like how you know how hard to throw a ball to hit a target. You don't calculate trajectory, you just know. This is the same. I've done it enough times that I just know. Martinez shook his head. The Army's gonna want to study you. Figure out how you do it. Teach it to other shooters. Charlie shrugged. You can't teach what takes 16 years to learn. You can't teach what my grandfather taught me starting when I was 7. The Army can teach mathematics. They can't teach seeing. By late October 1944, the German command in Charlie's sector was in crisis. 7 officers killed in 2 weeks. All by single shots. All at ranges exceeding 1,000 meters. Hauptmann Dietrich's theory about random chance had been thoroughly disproven by the mathematical improbability of 7 random hits at these distances. Major Brenner called another meeting. His remaining officers looked tired, stressed. Several had requested transfers. Morale was collapsing not from combat losses but from the psychological impact of knowing that distance no longer meant safety. Gentlemen, Brenner began, we have a serious problem. We are facing a marksman of exceptional ability. Not luck. Not random fire. This is deliberate, precise and consistent. Hauptmann Dietrich, your assessment? Dietrich looked haunted. He'd spent 2 weeks trying to counter-snipe. Had positioned himself in 3 different locations, had watched for muzzle flashes, had tried to predict where the American sniper would shoot from, had failed completely. Herr Major, I have never encountered a shooter like this. On the Eastern Front, Soviet snipers were excellent, but they operated at normal ranges, 600, maybe 800 meters maximum. This American, he's operating at ranges I believed were impossible. I've tried to make similar shots. I cannot. The calculations are too complex, the variables too numerous, yet he succeeds consistently. Could it be multiple snipers, different shooters? No, sir. The pattern is too consistent. Always single shots, always immediate withdrawal, always the same methodology. This is one man, and he's more skilled than anyone I've ever encountered or read about. Oberleutnant Meissner spoke up. We've captured an American soldier yesterday. During interrogation, I asked about snipers. He mentioned that some units have designated marksmen, but when I asked about long-range shooting, he laughed. Said their doctrine doesn't cover anything beyond 800 meters. Said anyone claiming to shoot beyond that was exaggerating. So this is outside even American doctrine? It appears so, sir. This may be an individual operating beyond standard training. Someone with exceptional natural ability. Brenner made a decision. We move all command personnel back. Minimum 1,500 meters from American positions. If he's shooting at 1,200 meters consistently, we need buffer distance. Yes, this will complicate command and control. Yes, this will slow our operations. But I will not lose any more officers to a sniper we cannot counter. The order went out that day. German command positions in the entire sector moved back. Bunkers that had been considered safe were abandoned. Observation posts were relocated. Operations were disrupted. Communication became more difficult. Response times increased. One Apache with a Springfield 1903 had forced an entire German division to reorganize its command structure. And Charlie wasn't done. November 3rd, 1944. Charlie received a special mission. A German artillery observer had been directing fire that was devastating American positions. The observer was in a reinforced position on a ridgeline. Distance, 1,287 yards. The farthest shot Charlie had attempted in combat. Captain Davies briefed him personally. Charlie, we need this observer eliminated. He's calling in fire that's killing our men. We've tried counter-battery fire. We've tried airstrikes. He's too well protected, too far back. But he has to observe to do his job. And when he observes, he's visible. Charlie studied the map. 1,287 yards. 3/4 of a mile. At that distance, bullet drop would be over 20 feet. Wind compensation would be measured in feet, not inches. The margin for error was essentially 0. I'll need good weather, sir. Can't do this in wind above 10 miles per hour. Too much variability. How long do you need? However long it takes for perfect conditions. Could be hours, could be days. But when conditions are right, I can make the shot. Davies nodded. Take Martinez. Take whatever supplies you need. This is priority one. Charlie and Martinez moved into position that night, found a hide 1,287 yards from the German observer position. Charlie measured the distance 5 different ways to be absolutely certain, ranged it with the mil-dot reticle in his scope, calculated it using terrain features, verified it with trigonometry using known landmarks. 1,287 yards, 21 feet of bullet drop. In a 10-mile-per-hour crosswind, approximately 22 inches of drift. But wind at this distance was rarely consistent. Could gust, could swirl, could change direction in the time the bullet traveled. They waited. 3 days. Charlie watched the weather, watched wind patterns, watched the clouds. The German observer appeared regularly, did his job, called in artillery that killed Americans. But the conditions weren't right. Wind too strong, gusts too unpredictable. Martinez grew frustrated. Charlie, we gotta take a shot, he's killing our guys. Bad shot kills nobody. Missed shot teaches him to be more careful. When I shoot, he dies. That requires perfect conditions. We wait. November 6th, dawn. The wind died. Completely. Less than 5 miles per hour. Steady. Consistent. The kind of conditions that happen maybe once a month in this terrain. Temperature was cold, 45 degrees. Humidity low. Visibility perfect. The German observer emerged at 0630 hours, stood in his observation post, raised binoculars, began scanning American positions. Charlie had been watching for 3 days, knew the observer's routine, knew he'd stand there for 2 to 3 minutes, knew this was the shot. He calculated 21 feet of drop, minimal wind drift, maybe 6 inches, Coriolis effect, 5 inches at this distance and latitude. Altitude differential between his position and target, approximately 300 feet elevation gain, meaning slightly flatter trajectory. Temperature was cold, denser air, slightly more drop. But humidity was low, less resistance, slightly less drop. The factors nearly canceled each other out. He aimed. So high that the crosshairs weren't even on the same screen as the target in his scope. He was aiming at empty sky 20 feet above the observer's head. The rifle was pointed at nothing, at air, at space. But Charlie wasn't pointing at air. He was pointing at the invisible path the bullet would travel. The arc through space that physics demanded. The intersection point of trajectory and target. Martinez whispered, I don't even see him in your scope. How can you hit what you can't see? I see the path. The target will be on the path when the bullet arrives. Charlie's breathing stopped. His heart rate dropped to maybe 40 beats per minute. The world narrowed to just the crosshairs, just the invisible point in space where bullet and target would meet in 2.3 seconds. He fired. The Springfield kicked. The bullet left the barrel at 2,800 feet per second, traveled through 3,861 feet of air, dropped 21 feet as gravity pulled it down, drifted 6 inches as light wind pushed it, curved slightly as the earth rotated beneath its path. Every variable Charlie had calculated in his head played out with physical precision in the cold Italian air. 2.3 seconds later, the German observer collapsed. Clean hit, center mass, instant death at 1,187 yards, the longest confirmed kill shot of the Italian campaign. A distance that wouldn't be exceeded by American snipers until decades later, with far superior optics and ammunition. Martinez was silent for a long moment. Then, Charlie, that's over 3/4 of a mile. Man, I watched you do it and I still don't believe it. Charlie chambered another round, scanned for more targets, but the German positions were empty. Everyone had disappeared. One shot at an impossible distance, and an entire sector had learned to hide. They packed up and moved back to American lines. Charlie's report was simple. Observer eliminated at 1,287 yards, clean kill. No follow-up shot required. Captain Davies read the report 3 times, then called Charlie into his office. 287 yards, Charlie, that's going to change how the Army thinks about long-range shooting. That's 3 times what doctrine says is possible. Doctrine is written by people who don't hunt, sir. My grandfather hunted at these distances because that's what the terrain required. I'm just doing what he taught me. The Army's going to want you to teach others. Train snipers in these techniques. Charlie shook his head slightly. Can't teach in a few weeks what took 16 years to learn, sir. The Army can teach mathematics and ballistics, but they can't teach what my people know. Can't teach the patience. Can't teach the seeing. That comes from growing up where missing means your family doesn't eat, where every shot has to count because ammunition costs money you don't have. The Army didn't make me a shooter. My grandfather did. The reservation did. Necessity did. Davies understood. Or tried to. Then what do we do with you? How do we use this capability? Same as before, sir. Give me targets that other shooters can't reach. Give me the distances that doctrine says are impossible. That's where I work best. And that's exactly what happened. For the remainder of the Italian campaign, Charlie Chihuahua was assigned the impossible shots. The officers who thought they were safe. The observers who stayed too far back. The commanders who believed distance was protection. By war's end, Charlie had 47 confirmed kills at ranges exceeding 1,000 yards. The longest was 1,311 yards. A German major who was coordinating a counterattack, who believed he was completely safe nearly 8/10 of a mile behind the front lines. The German forces developed a grudging respect that bordered on superstition. In captured documents found after the war, American intelligence discovered references to Der Geistschütze, the ghost shooter, a sniper who could kill at impossible ranges, who never missed, who appeared and disappeared without trace. One captured German officer, Oberleutnant Franz Weber, was interrogated in December 1944. The transcript of that interrogation, preserved in the National Archives, includes this exchange. Interrogator: How did German snipers compare to American snipers? Weber: In normal circumstances, equal. Perhaps German snipers had slight advantage due to better training, better optics. But the Americans had one shooter who was not normal. We called him the Ghost. He killed from distances we believed impossible. Over 1,000 meters consistently. We measured, we verified, and we had no defense. Interrogator: Did you ever identify this shooter? Weber: No. We tried. We assigned our best counter-snipers. We watched for patterns. We found nothing. He was invisible, or rather he was so far away that our counter-sniper doctrine was useless. By the time we figured out where he'd shot from, he was gone, and he never shot from the same position twice. Interrogator: What was the impact on your operations? Weber: Significant. We had to move command positions back, minimum 1,500 meters from American lines. This complicated everything. Communication, coordination, response time. One shooter forced us to reorganize an entire sector's command structure. I was a professional soldier for 6 years. I had never seen one man have such tactical impact. After the war, Charlie returned home to Arizona. No medals, despite Captain Davies submitting him for commendations multiple times. The paperwork got lost, delayed, forgotten in the chaos of demobilization. Charlie didn't mind, didn't want recognition, just wanted to go home. He resumed hunting, resumed life on the reservation, married, had children, worked various jobs, spoke rarely about his service. When asked directly, he'd give short answers. I was a marksman. I shot at long distances, that's all. His son, Joseph Chihuahua, interviewed him in 1982 for a school project about veterans. The interview, recorded on cassette tape and preserved by the family, captures one of the few times Charlie spoke in detail about his service. Joseph: Dad, the Army records say you had 47 confirmed kills at over 1,000 yards. Some sources say you shot at distances over 1,300 yards. Is that true? Charlie: Records are accurate. 47 confirmed. Longest was about 1,310 yards, give or take. Joseph: How did you do it? That's like shooting from one mountain to another. Charlie: Same as hunting elk with your grandfather. Same principles. Know the land. Know the wind. Know where the bullet goes. Don't shoot at where the target is. Shoot at where it will be when the bullet arrives. Your great-grandfather taught me that. I just applied it to different kind of hunting. Joseph. But the Army must have been amazed. Those distances were impossible according to their training. Charlie. They were impossible according to their experience. But our people have been making long shots for as long as we've had rifles. On the reservation, you don't get close shots. Terrain doesn't allow it. Game doesn't allow it. You learn long range or you don't eat. The Army thought they were teaching me to shoot. I'd been doing it since I was 7. They just gave me targets that stood still longer than deer. Joseph. The German soldiers, did you think about them? That they were people? Charlie was quiet for a moment. I thought about our soldiers. The Americans being killed by German artillery that those officers were directing. The men dying because German snipers were shooting them. Every German I shot, that was one less calling artillery on our boys. That was one less coordinating attacks. I didn't hate them, didn't know them. But they needed to be stopped so our people could survive. Same as hunting. You don't hate the deer, but you take what's necessary for your family to live. Joseph. Do you regret it? Charlie. I regret war exists. I regret young men have to kill each other over decisions made by old men. But do I regret doing my job to save American lives? No. I was a soldier. I did what soldiers do. I protected my people. That's what warriors do. That's what our people have always done. In 1997, a military historian named Colonel Robert Henderson tracked Charlie down while researching long-range shooting in World War II. Henderson had been comparing confirmed kills at extreme distances, and Charlie's record stood out. 47 kills at over 1,000 yards, using a bolt-action rifle from 1903, with iron sights and a basic scope that had no range-finding capability, no ballistic calculator, nothing but glass and crosshairs. Henderson interviewed Charlie for 3 days. Recorded hours of conversation, took Charlie to a range and watched him shoot. At age 77, Charlie made consistent hits at 800 yards with 3 rounds fired. Henderson's report, submitted to the Army Marksmanship Unit, included this assessment. Private First Class Charlie Chihuahua represents a unique case in military marksmanship. His ability to calculate and execute long-range shots exceeded not only contemporary doctrine, but also the capabilities of most modern snipers, even with superior equipment. What makes his achievement remarkable is not just the distances involved, but the consistency. 47 confirmed kills at ranges exceeding 1,000 yards represents a success rate that should be statistically impossible, given the variables involved and the equipment available. When asked how he achieved this, PFC Chihuahua attributes it to training received from his grandfather starting in childhood. Traditional Apache hunting methods, applied to military sniping, with emphasis on patience, observation, and understanding of environmental factors. My assessment is that PFC Chihuahua possessed a combination of natural ability, extensive practice, and cultural knowledge that created a skill set the military could not replicate through standard training. His grandfather essentially trained him as a long-range marksman for 16 years before the Army ever saw him. He represents a broader truth that military leadership should consider, that traditional knowledge, passed through generations and refined through necessity, can exceed modern training in specific applications. The Apache people survived in harsh environments where long-range hunting was essential. PFC Chihuahua simply brought that survival skill to warfare. The German forces he opposed had no counter to this. Their doctrine didn't prepare them for a sniper operating at these distances. Their training didn't cover scenarios where an individual marksman could threaten command personnel at over 3/4 of a mile. One soldier, using knowledge his people had refined over generations, created tactical advantages that changed how an entire sector operated. This is not to say traditional knowledge always exceeds modern training, but it demonstrates that dismissing traditional skills as primitive or outdated can be a serious strategic error. PFC Chihuahua was not primitive. He was specialized in a way the modern military had forgotten was possible. Charlie Chihuahua died in 1999 at age 79. His funeral was attended by family, friends, a handful of veterans who'd served with him, and Colonel Henderson, who'd traveled from Virginia to pay respects. No military honors, no news coverage, no public recognition. Just a quiet burial near his childhood home on the White Mountain Apache Reservation, where he'd first learned to shoot at age 7, but his legacy lived on. in military training programs that began teaching longer-range shooting, in doctrine that expanded effective engagement ranges, in the understanding that traditional knowledge had military value, in Native American communities that told his story to young people considering military service, and in one specific lesson that Hauptmann Dietrich, the German counter-sniper who'd failed to stop Charlie, learned and carried with him for the rest of his life. In a 1978 interview for a German military history documentary, Dietrich was asked about his most challenging opponent in the war. His response: "On the Eastern Front, I faced Soviet snipers who were skilled, brave, and deadly. Some of the best marksmen I have ever encountered. But in Italy, I faced something different. An American. An Apache Indian. I never saw him. Never got close to finding him. He operated at ranges I believed were impossible. I was trained at the German sniper school. Understood ballistics, wind, trajectory, everything the science could teach. But this Apache, he knew something beyond science. He knew his land, knew his weapon, knew patience in a way that no school could teach. After the war, I studied Apache history, learned that his people survived by being superior hunters, learned that they hunted in terrain so difficult that long-range shooting was necessity, not specialty, learned that he'd been trained since childhood by his grandfather, who was himself trained by his grandfather, knowledge passing through generations. I realized then that I had not been facing just a soldier. I was facing centuries of accumulated knowledge, facing a warrior tradition that predated modern warfare, facing someone who approached sniping not as military discipline, but as extension of hunting skills his ancestors had perfected over centuries. The lesson I learned was this: never dismiss someone because their training seems primitive or their methods seem outdated. The Apache with his old Springfield defeated me with my modern training and equipment because his knowledge was deeper, more fundamental, more connected to land and wind and distance than anything I had learned in classrooms. If I could speak to him today, I would say thank you. Thank you for teaching me that respect is earned, not assumed. Thank you for showing me that there are ways of knowing that exist outside formal training. Thank you for defeating me so thoroughly that I had to question everything I thought I knew about my profession. And I would apologize for the arrogance I felt when I first heard about him, for assuming that modern training made me superior, for believing that someone from a primitive culture couldn't possibly exceed my capabilities. I was wrong, and I learned. But the lesson cost German lives, cost my pride, cost my certainty. That is the price of underestimating someone you do not understand. The story of Charlie Chihuahua and his impossible shots echoes through military history as a reminder that sometimes the oldest ways are still the most effective, that technology doesn't replace knowledge, that formal training doesn't always exceed traditional wisdom. When German officers stood at 800 meters and declared themselves safe because mathematics said they were beyond effective range, they were right according to doctrine. They were right according to training. They were right according to everything modern military science taught. But they were wrong according to a different kind of knowledge. Knowledge that Charlie's grandfather had passed to him. Knowledge that generations of Apache hunters had refined. Knowledge that said if you can see it, you can hit it. If you understand wind and distance and patience and the way a bullet travels through air. Charlie shot at distances doctrine said were impossible. Made kills that probability said couldn't be consistent. Operated at ranges that transformed him from soldier into force of nature in German minds. 47 confirmed kills at over 1,000 yards. Longest shot, 311 yards. A record that stood for decades. Achieved with a rifle from 1903, a basic scope, and knowledge passed down from a grandfather who'd learned it from his grandfather. The Germans laughed when they heard Americans had Indian soldiers, called them primitive, called them savages, called them unsuited for modern war. Then they met Charlie Chihuahua, and the laughter stopped at 200 yards. The ghost shooter, der Geist Schütze, the Apache who proved that 800 meters was not the limit of human capability, just the limit of what people who'd never learned to truly see distance could achieve. And in doing so, he taught a lesson that echoes still. Never underestimate knowledge refined through generations. Never dismiss traditions you don't understand. Never assume that your training is the only training that matters. Because somewhere, someone learned different lessons, learned older lessons, learned lessons so fundamental and so deep that they exceed what any school can teach in weeks or months. Charlie Chihuahua learned to shoot at 200 yards not because the Army taught him, but because his grandfather taught him. Because his people had been making those shots for generations. Because necessity, survival, and tradition had created a marksman who operated at levels modern doctrine couldn't explain. The Germans said 800 meters was impossible. Charlie shot at 200 yards and proved that impossible was just a word used by people who hadn't learned what Apache hunters knew.